My name is Julia. I'm 27, and I've always loved the quiet of nature, especially the woods. I grew up around them, hiked often, and even spent solo weekends in cabins just to feel disconnected from the world. But something happened last fall that I can't unsee or unfeel, and I've barely talked about it since. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend away. I rented a small, old cabin tucked into a forested ridge in northern Vermont. Off-grid, barely a signal bar, and surrounded by thick pine and birch. It was everything I needed after a burnout, heavy summer. I arrived just after noon, the trees golden from early October sun, and the whole place humming with calm. I unpacked, made tea, sat on the porch, and just breathed. That first night I barely noticed anything strange, but I did remember something odd when I went to bed. The trees outside my window moved. I thought it was wind at first, but when I checked the weather app earlier, it said the air was dead still. I brushed it off. Trees sway for all sorts of reasons, and honestly, I was tired. The next day, though, I started paying attention. I was sitting outside with a book when I noticed a particular tree not tall, more like a crooked birch, shivering slightly. The others around it were completely still. I stared at it for a while, curious, then set the book down and watched. Its branches didn't sway side to side. They twitched, jerky, sharp, like something was crawling through it or moving it on purpose. I even stood up and checked the ground, thinking maybe an animal or breeze was involved, but the air around me was cold and still. The moment I stepped closer, the movement stopped completely. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing small sounds outside the windows, twigs snapping, leaves crunching, that kind of thing. I know forests are alive at night, but these weren't animal sounds. They were rhythmic, steady, almost like pacing, and there was that tree again, right outside the back window this time, the same crooked birch. But here's the part I still can't process. It hadn't been there the day before. I had taken pictures of the cabin when I arrived, and when I looked at them again later, the space where that tree stood was empty. On the third day I went for a hike. I followed a trail from the back of the cabin that looped into the deeper part of the woods. It was quiet, peaceful again for a while, but then I saw it, that same tree, the crooked birch, bent slightly to the left with its split-down trunk and missing bark near the base, standing right beside the trail. I stopped, my chest tightened. I thought stupidly maybe there were just lots of trees that looked like that, but every time I looked away I swore it shifted closer, just by a foot, a few inches, never while I was looking directly. But enough to notice. I turned around and went back to the cabin. That night I locked every door, every window. I kept the lights on, didn't even pretend to sleep. I watched that tree from the kitchen window. I watched it twitch and shift and tremble like something inside it was trying to get out. It wasn't a breeze. There was no wind. I could feel it in the air, dead, cold, unmoving, but the tree never stopped. At 3:17 a.m. I saw something lean out from behind it. Not a person, not clearly, just a dark shape like an arm, long and thin and too slow in its movement. It reached around the trunk, curled toward the window. And then it vanished. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't move from the floor until morning light broke through the cracks in the walls. I left the cabin without cleaning, without looking back. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember the quiet, and how the woods seemed to lean in as I passed, like they wanted me to stay, like I was being watched, not by animals, but by the trees themselves. They never stood still, not even once. It started on the second evening, right as the sky dimmed and the shadows began pulling longer across the trees, that in-between time, where the last warmth of the day slips into the hush of evening, used to be my favorite part of staying in the woods. But now I don't think I'll ever feel comfort in that hour again. I was on the porch, just sitting there with a blanket and my tea, listening to the birds wind down. That kind of silence, the one only nature offers, has always been sacred to me. But it didn't stay silent, not that night, not after the first whisper. It was faint, so faint I thought it was wind skimming over the leaves, but it had shape, rhythm, like someone exhaling a word just under their breath. I paused, holding my cup midair. The trees were still, my breath caught as I strained to hear again. Then I heard it, closer this time, a whisper, definitely a whisper, but not mine. I stood up and backed slowly into the doorway, not slamming it, not moving too quickly, like somehow speed would make whatever it was notice me more. I listened again, nothing, just stillness. But when I went to bed later that night, they returned. Lying in bed with the covers pulled up high, I kept my ears open, no music, no podcasts, just silence and the occasional creak of the old cabin. Then, maybe an hour in, I heard the same soft hush again. A breathy voice just outside the window to my left. It wasn't speaking in full sentences, at least not ones I understood. It sounded like syllables formed in an unfamiliar mouth, the kind of whisper not meant to be heard, but still reaching, still deliberate. I held my breath, I didn't move, and I didn't open the curtain. I don't know how long it lasted. At some point I must have passed out from exhaustion or fear, but in the morning the air felt wrong, stagnant, heavy in a way that didn't match the lightness of the sunshine pouring in. And there were small things, things I could have ignored if they weren't so perfectly out of place. The salt shaker on the window-sill had tipped over. The door chain, which I always latch, was unhooked. The book I'd left beside my bed was now on the floor, open to a page I hadn't reached yet, and that page, the text was smudged, as if someone had dragged their fingers across it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that cabins creak, things shift in the night, and dreams can blend into waking. I held on to that lie until sunset returned again, and so did the whispers. This time they were layered. Not just one, not even two. It was like a soft chorus, humming just beneath the sound of the wind. Except there was no wind. The leaves outside didn't move. The branches were still, but I could hear them. Dozens of voices murmuring, calling, not loud, not urgent, just persistent. They didn't sound angry, they didn't even sound human, but they knew I was there. I turned every light in the cabin on. I lit candles, I paced, the whispers moved with me, always outside, never distant, always just behind the nearest window or wall. I wanted to call someone, but I had no signal, no Wi-Fi. I wanted to drive away, but night had fallen, and the narrow forest road was too dark and winding. I told myself to wait till morning, but then the whispers came inside. I was standing in the kitchen when it happened. Right behind me, at the base of my neck, I heard one clear word, a whisper, but right there in my ear. I don't know what it said. Maybe it wasn't even a word in a language I know, but it chilled me deeper than cold ever could. I dropped my glass and ran into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. The whispers stayed outside that room, circling closer than walls should allow. I could feel them pressing in, brushing against the edges of sound, always right there, but never loud, never shouting, just breathing words I never asked to hear. In the morning they were gone, but I wasn't. I left that cabin by noon, but no matter how far I drove, the quiet never sounded right again. The air always felt a little too thick, and sometimes, just as the sky starts to darken, I hear it again, soft, close, and not my own. There's something about walking a familiar path that brings a kind of quiet comfort. You start to recognize the curve of each tree, the soft bend in the trail where roots reach up like veins beneath the soil. That's how it always was for me, until that morning, until I noticed something had changed. The forest behind the cabin wasn't vast, but it was easy to get lost in if you weren't paying attention. I always stuck to the same loop, start near the old oak with the split trunk, pass the mossy boulder, circle back when the creek appears. I'd walked it dozens of times, but on that morning the loop didn't bring me back. It led somewhere else. I had that crawling sensation, the kind that makes the hairs on your arms stand even before anything's wrong. And then I saw it, a path I had never seen before. It split from the trail like it had always been there, like I'd just somehow never noticed it. But I knew it hadn't. I knew. The leaves around it were disturbed. The dirt looked freshly stepped on, the ground pressed with a pattern I didn't recognize. At first I thought maybe it was an animal trail, until I got closer. They were footprints, bare, human, small enough to belong to a woman, maybe even a teenager, pressed firmly into the damp forest floor. Each one pointed straight ahead into that unnatural path, but there was only one set, no returning steps. I don't know why I followed them. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear masking itself as bravery. But I stepped off the trail and followed the path that shouldn't have existed. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no rustling, just the crunch of my own feet and the occasional whisper of a breeze brushing leaves that felt wrong somehow, artificial, like a set piece designed to imitate nature, but missing the soul of it. About 10 minutes in, I realized something else. I was circling, not in a way that brought me back, but in a way that felt too consistent. Every 3 or 4 minutes, I'd pass the same split tree, one that oozed sap so dark it looked like blood. I marked it the first time, dragging a rock across its bark. The second time I saw it, the mark was gone. But the sap was still fresh, still sticky, as if someone had wiped it clean and walked away moments before I arrived. That's when I turned around, or I tried to. There should have been no confusion. I hadn't turned at any junctions, hadn't strayed from the footsteps. But behind me the trail was gone, vanished, the ground was untouched, pristine, and the footprints still ahead of me, only now they weren't alone. There were 2 sets. The new ones overlapped the originals, heavier, deeper, like someone had caught up to whoever had walked first. But the strangest part was how the stride changed. It wasn't walking anymore. The spacing between each step widened as if the person had started running. Fast, in the direction they were running, toward me, I froze. My ears strained for any sound. The air was thick, too warm. My skin prickled with sweat, and every instinct in my body screamed to move. But I couldn't, not until I saw it. Just ahead, where the light filtered through the canopy in a thin, golden sheet, something passed through, a flicker, like a shadow skipping across a screen. It was fast, but not silent. The kind of silence you notice because everything else gets out of the way for it. Then came the noise, a soft crunch, one footstep, then another. Just beyond the trees, I turned and ran. I didn't care if I was loud. I didn't care if I got lost. I just ran, the underbrush slashing at my legs and arms as I stumbled forward. Every few seconds I looked behind me, and each time I saw nothing, but I heard it, that same crunch, that same breath just out of reach. I burst out onto the porch of the cabin, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop shaking for hours. Later that evening I walked back out with a flashlight, determined to prove to myself it was all in my head. But the forest was still, calm, normal, and there were no footprints, not even mine. I don't know what made me go back out there. Maybe I was looking for closure, or maybe I just wanted to see it again in the daylight. Whatever it was, I regret it. We had camped at that spot countless times before, a clearing tucked just off the trail, surrounded by tall pines that always felt like they were keeping watch. It was remote, quiet, untouched in the way only true wilderness can be. I used to love that silence. Now it only makes my skin crawl. That last trip was supposed to be the same as always. 4 of us. We arrived late afternoon, set up camp, shared dumb stories by the fire, laughed louder than we probably should have. Nothing unusual, nothing ominous, just the smell of wood smoke and pine needles, the way it always was. I remember falling asleep that night to the sound of one of my friends snoring softly in the tent beside mine, and the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful, completely normal, but when I woke up everything had changed. The first thing I noticed was the cold. The kind that feels unnatural, like it comes from the ground instead of the air. My sleeping bag was unzipped, though I never sleep that way. My boots were at the foot of my tent, moved from inside where I always leave them. I thought maybe I had just been careless. I didn't start to feel sick until I stepped outside. The campsite was wrecked, not violently. There were no torn tents, no blood, nothing broken, but everything was wrong. Our gear was moved, packs hung in trees they hadn't been near before, cooking pots stacked neatly on a stump, like someone had arranged them. The campfire had been extinguished completely, buried and cold, not smoking like you'd expect in the morning, but the worst part. Everyone was gone. I called for them, loud at first, then louder. I searched the clearing, then the edge of the trail, thinking maybe they'd gone to relieve themselves or take a short walk. But the forest was silent. Not even the birds made a sound. Their tents were still zipped shut from the outside. Inside, their things were untouched, phones still there, wallets, even half, finished water bottles sitting just as they'd left them. One of their jackets was slung over a camp chair, a bit of condensation from the morning dew gathering on the fabric. There was no panic, no mess, just absence, as if they had simply stood up and walked away into the woods without any reason to. I waited hours, screamed until my throat hurt, walked circles around the clearing until I couldn't tell where I'd started. I even left for the ranger station an hour away, thinking maybe there had been some kind of emergency I didn't understand. But when I came back with help, the site looked different. The tents were all gone. The fire pit was covered over with leaves, and the ground, which I had trampled so heavily in my panic, was untouched. No prints, no drag marks, not even a trace of the tire tracks from the ranger's truck. Just quiet, and trees, and a faint impression of something once being there. They filed a report. I gave my statement. There was a small search, brief and fruitless, and I could tell they didn't believe me. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, just a girl alone, rambling about a campsite that looked abandoned but orderly. But I know what I saw. I went back there once, weeks later, couldn't stay away. It was the same place, I was sure of it, but there were no signs of any campsite ever being there. Not even the faint circle of burnt earth where we used to place the fire. It was like the forest had swallowed it whole, reclaimed it, scrubbed it clean, and as I stood there, frozen and helpless, I noticed something else. Just beyond the clearing, half hidden by a tree, was a single tent stake, bent at an odd angle. I never touched it. Just stared at it for a long time, until the feeling in my chest became too heavy to carry. That silence never left me. It wasn't peace. It wasn't solitude. It was a warning. I used to go on night hikes. It was something I found calming, being alone in the woods, hearing nothing but my own footsteps and the occasional brush of wind through the trees. There's a quiet kind of freedom in it, or at least there was. That feeling's gone now. It started to rot away the night something stared back at me in a place where nothing should have had eyes. I remember it clearly because that night had been still, and naturally so. No insects, no rustling, just the crunch of dirt under my boots. I'd brought a small flashlight, not because I needed it, but because I liked the way the beam cut through the shadows. It gave the illusion of control, like I could shine it on anything and understand it. About 20 minutes in, I began to feel like I wasn't alone. Not in the way you feel when there's a deer watching or a rabbit tucked under a bush. This felt directional, deliberate, like I was being observed. I slowed down. My light moved over the trees, the brush, the crooked arms of branches that reached low and twisted, and then something blinked, a set of eyes, two white spots in the dark. They closed, then opened again, but there was no shape around them, no face, no outline, just two eyes floating between the trees. I stopped breathing for a second. My mind tried to explain it away, maybe a raccoon, maybe the reflection of a bird. But then they blinked again, slowly, deliberately, as if they knew I was looking right at them. I called out, thinking maybe someone else was on the trail. My voice came out cracked and small. Nothing answered. The eyes didn't move, didn't flinch. They just stayed fixed on me, unblinking now, wide and far too still. I took a step back, and the underbrush behind me cracked like something else had stepped on it. I spun around, light cutting into the woods, catching nothing. When I turned back, the eyes were gone. I should have turned back then. I know that now. Instead, I pressed forward, faster than before. Every few steps I'd flick my light to the side into the trees. And almost every time I saw them again, blinking just for a second, always in a different spot, always at a distance, watching. It wasn't until I reached the old ranger's bridge, just a narrow wooden crossing over a dry ravine, that I realized the blinking had stopped. Not because whatever it was had left, because it had gotten closer. My flashlight flickered, not all at once, but in short bursts. I tapped it. It went out. The woods fell into blackness so thick I could barely see my hands. And then, not even 10 feet ahead of me, two eyes opened, right there at chest height, no shape, no silhouette, just two floating lights slowly blinking, then, widening. They didn't reflect like animal eyes. They didn't catch the beam or shine. They glowed faintly, like something was burning just beneath them. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. I couldn't run. I couldn't even move properly. The air around me felt thick, too heavy to breathe. And then the blinking spread, not just in front of me any more, to my left, to my right, behind me, dozens of them, all blinking out of sync, some high, some low, none attached to anything I could see. I spun in circles, too terrified to scream. The blinking began to slow, and then one pair of eyes tilted sideways like a curious animal or something trying to understand me. I finally ran. I don't remember making it back to the trailhead. I don't remember fumbling with my keys or starting the car. But I remember the way the woods looked from the road. Completely normal, still, quiet. And I remember, in the mirror, one final pair of eyes watching from the tree line before they slowly closed and vanished. I never went back, not even in the daytime. Some nights, when it's quiet enough, I think I can still see those eyes when I close mine. They blink in the dark behind my eyelids. They watch, not with malice, not with hunger, but with something worse, interest. People think that once you step out of the woods you're safe, that the line between forest and road means something, that if you cross it, whatever was there before stays behind. But that's not true. I left that place, but it never left me. It was a camping trip, just a couple of nights, not far off the main road, a well-used spot with a fire ring, old tree stumps turned into makeshift chairs, and a trail that looped around a small lake. Harmless, really. I'd been there before and nothing had ever happened. The first night was normal, laughing, cooking over the fire, watching sparks rise into the branches. The trees surrounded us like a soft wall, protective in the way nature sometimes feels when you're relaxed and distant from noise. But the second night, it changed. The forest felt different. It started just before sunset. The light had gone gold, then deepened into amber as it filtered through the trees. That was when I heard it, something subtle, a shift. The breeze had died down completely, and even the birds stopped calling. I remember thinking it was strange that it got so quiet so fast. Later, when the darkness settled in, the silence stayed. We sat close to the fire. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we all noticed it. You could feel something, breathing maybe, a heaviness in the air. It clung to your skin like humidity, but colder. At one point I got up to get water from the car. The path wasn't far, just a short walk back through a line of thin trees. But as soon as I stepped away from the firelight, the stillness hit harder. The forest felt pressed in, as if it had gotten smaller, denser, tighter in the last few hours, and then I saw something. Not a person. Not even a shape, really. Just motion. The trees didn't move, but something between them did. It was like the darkness shifted ever so slightly, not with sound, but with intent. I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself a lot of things that night. I got the water and came back quickly, trying not to look behind me, though every cell in my body screamed to. My friends looked relieved when I returned. One of them whispered, "Did you hear it?" I lied and said no. But I had the breathing, the slight pressure, the sensation that something unseen had paused just long enough to notice me. We didn't sleep much. We left in the morning, all of us eager to pack up and go. No one said why. No one wanted to give whatever it was a name, but here's the part no one talks about, the part I learned too late. Once we were out of the forest, once I was back home, back in my own bed, the feeling didn't leave. I kept hearing things, low noises just at the edge of silence. I'd wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. and feel watched, not like I was being paranoid, but as if the trees themselves were still leaning in, still brushing against the edge of my thoughts. My phone started glitching. The flashlight would flick on randomly. I found dirt on my floor in places I hadn't walked with shoes. My windows would fog up on the inside, even with no moisture in the air. It got worse when I ignored it. One night I walked past my mirror and saw something behind me, not in the room. In the reflection, a branch, a sliver of pine, reaching toward me like a hand. When I turned around, there was nothing there. But I swear I could smell the woods, wet bark, moss, the faint scent of something rotting. Sleep became harder. Dreams turned to walks through the same part of the forest I had left, only each time the trees were closer, the paths narrower, and something just beyond the edge of vision was always waiting. I tried moving. I stayed with a friend for a while. The feeling followed. Whatever that forest was, whatever we touched, or whatever touched us, it didn't stay behind. It marked us, or me. Maybe it waits until nightfall. Maybe it doesn't care about time at all. But I know now, just because you leave the forest doesn't mean the forest leaves you, and I don't think it ever will. Thanks for listening to my story. I wish I could tell you that it ended when I stepped out of those woods. But the truth is it didn't. I've learned that some places don't need to chase you. They only need to notice you once, and once they do, they follow. Not in footsteps, but in silence, in shadows, in the way the dark lingers a little too long in your room. So if you ever find yourself deep in the forest, and it suddenly feels like the air itself is holding its breath, leave, but don't expect to come back untouched. Some things don't stay in the woods. Some things come home with you. And some of them are already there. Good night. Sleep lightly.